This man is Sammy, a 26-year-old unemployed and single man. That morning he planned to climb the highest mountain in the world, namely Mount Everest, even though he had no mountain climbing experience at all, to prove his love for a woman named Nadia, his love since childhood. He then looked for funding for his journey and his story went viral. After his preparation was done, he said goodbye to his mother and his father took him to attend a radio interview invitation before going to the airport. When they arrived, his father told him never to give up no matter what happened and to keep climbing to the top. Hearing his father's advice, he became more and more enthusiastic. As the interview progressed, the announcers seemed to belittle him, even a little racist towards him. They asked why a black unemployed guy with no experience in climbing wanted to get to the top of the highest mountain in the world. At first they continued to laugh, but when they found out that the reason Sammy did it was to prove his love for Nadia, they were interested in broadcasting the climbing exclusively. Amid the conversation, Sammy remembered the day he made his promise to Nadia. That night after picking Nadia up from work, Sammy invited her to hang out at the cafe. The two of them were close friends from high school. When taking her home, Sammy dared to confess his love, but Nadia refused. She didn't want to be in a relationship and just wanted to get married straight away. If he was serious, she asked for proof from him. Upon hearing that, to prove his seriousness, Sammy promised to climb Mount Everest for her. Thinking Sammy was just joking, Nadia said that she would date him if he reached the peak of Everest. Sammy was determined to prove it to her. After the radio interview, Sammy left for the airport. After flying for hours, he finally arrived at Kathmandu Airport in India. When he met the travel agent, he was taken to the inn. Meanwhile, in France, when Nadia was working at the supermarket, her co-worker told her that she and Sammy went viral. Everyone was excited for them. At first, Nadia thought the news was a lie, but when she found out that Sammy had arrived in India, she was shocked. She didn't expect that Sammy would actually climb Mount Everest to prove his love for her. She was touched. After putting his things in the inn, Sammy walked around the market while calling the radio broadcaster to report on his journey. He told them that he would go to Lukla in Nepal from India the very next day, which was 2,864 meters above sea level, and from there he would start climbing Mount Everest. Broadcasters and radio listeners couldn't wait for the new news. The next morning at the airport, before leaving, the travel agent encouraged him not to be afraid. The climbing route would not be as scary as he imagined. Even though accidents often happen, not everyone dies from them. On average, climbers would survive, though, with major injuries. Hearing that, Sammy started to feel weak. After half an hour of flying, Sammy arrived at Lukla Airport, Nepal. When he got off the plane, a local resident named Johnny offered the service of carrying backpacks to the top of Mount Everest. To save money, Sammy refused, but in the middle of the climb, because he couldn't walk anymore, he decided to hire Johnny's services. Johnny was happy to hear that. He immediately brought Sammy's backpack and left for the inn. Sammy hurriedly followed. In the inn, while enjoying the view, Sammy met a professional guide named Jeff who would guide him to climb Mount Everest. Later, Jeff would also give him a list of equipment that he had to buy, and the next morning, it would start the climb. In the evening, when Sammy was eating at the restaurant, several residents passed by carrying the corpses of the climbers. Seeing that, Sammy became worried. The next morning, before leaving, Jeff and the climbers had a briefing first. After explaining the travel routes, Jeff asked all climbers to be careful because accidents often happen. The most important thing was not how to get to the top of the mountain, but how to get home safely. After the briefing, Sammy and the climbers started their journey to the top of the highest mountain in the world. After walking for hours due to exhaustion, Sammy asked to rest for a while. He couldn't stand it anymore, feeling like he was going to die. Suddenly, a resident passed by carrying a pile of heavy backpacks belonging to the climbers. Sammy was stunned, and because he was embarrassed after seeing that, he continued walking again. Seeing that Sammy was tired, Johnny, who had reached the first base camp, immediately gave him food and drink. During the break, some residents passed by while carrying heavy stuff, and even one of them carried a refrigerator. Sammy was shocked. The radio announcer then called to ask for the progress of the climb. Sammy told them many things. From the car radio, when he heard that his son was fine, Sammy's father was relieved. On the other hand, Nadia was on the phone with her friend. She told her friend that she also liked Sammy, but she didn't tell him about it. After the call, Nadia's mother came and said that she was happy that a kind man like Sammy was willing to fight for her daughter. Hearing that, Nadia smiled shyly. At the first base camp, after the stamina recovered, all the climbers continued the journey. When they reached a village, it took a short rest again. Johnny and the residents then carried a pile of backpacks. After catching some breath, the journey continued. Sammy successfully reached a height of 3,440 meters. The climbers decided to stay for a day in a town called Nanch Bazaar. In the hotel room, after showering and changing, Johnny came to say hello. Seeing a novel, Johnny was very happy. Since he was so busy working, he barely had the time to read books. John even told Sammy about his idol musicians. Every time he climbed the mountain to entertain himself, he always listened to music from his idol musician. While chatting, Sammy asked for Johnny's help to take him to the market to buy equipment. After shopping, Sammy hung out at the shop while enjoying the view when suddenly he was invited by other climbers to play football with local residents, but the locals were too good for them. They lost a landslide, and because of that, Sammy and his teammate got into a fight. After the match, Sammy treated his injury while calling the radio announcer to give the latest updates. The next day, he would leave for the base camp at the foot of Mount Everest. Nadia, who heard about the update, was happy. The next day, Sammy continued the climb. When the peak of a mountain could be seen, he and Jeff were happy that soon they would reach the peak. 3 days passed, and because it was hard to get a signal, Sammy couldn't contact the radio. Nadia started to worry. After work, she continued to wait for news. On the broadcast, one of the listeners called and expressed support for Sammy. Not only did she encourage Sammy, but she also said that she wanted to be Sammy's girlfriend. Out of jealousy, Nadia slammed the radio. The next day, after Sammy was declared missing, his mother cried. Her husband immediately hugged her while trying to calm her down. Later that day, Sammy's mother confronted Nadia at the supermarket where she worked. She continued to blame her. Because of her, Sammy was missing on Mount Everest. Nadia couldn't say anything and felt guilty. Meanwhile, Sammy had reached half the height of Mount Everest, 4620 above sea level. Due to his lack of focus, he was left behind by the group. Panicked, he hurried to catch up, but he still couldn't catch up with the group and even got more lost. At first, Sammy wanted to give up, but when he remembered Nadia, his determination suddenly returned. He encouraged himself to continue climbing. Fortunately, when he arrived at the altitude of 5364, he finally managed to find the next base camp. At night at base camp, fortunately, a satellite telephone was provided. Sammy then contacted the radio announcer again. When they heard Sammy's voice, the broadcasters were relieved. In the morning, Sammy's father and Nadia had heard about Sammy, and they were all happy and very grateful. Meanwhile, on the mountain, when Sammy was having breakfast, he got to know a professional climber and reporter of an adventure TV program. While telling stories about their experiences, the climbers said that most people would fail on their first attempt to climb the peak of Everest, but on average, they would succeed on the next attempt. The very steep path and the thin oxygen were the main causes of failure for climbers. He told Sammy not to force himself on his first attempt because he could always try again. Even though Sammy was worried, but because this was his only chance, he had no other choice but to reach the summit. After breakfast, Sammy got his condition checked. Not long after that, Jeff told him to hurry up and put on safety gear, then gather at the ice cliff. Because he had never used safety equipment at all, Sammy was confused. Luckily, Johnny happened to be there, so he helped Sammy wear the safety gear. After the climbers gathered at the ice cliff, Jeff told them to practice climbing first. One by one, the climbers managed to climb the cliff, except Sammy. Due to not being able to climb, Jeff warned that if in 3 days he still couldn't do it, that he would be forced not to go back. That night in the tent, Johnny found Sammy frustrated. Feeling sorry, Johnny decided to teach Sammy to climb. Thanks to training from him, Sammy was able to pass the test. The next day, all the climbers followed a prayer ritual, and after that, they continued their climb. However, because they were blocked by a cliff, they had no other choice but to cross the cliff by using a ladder as a bridge. In France, Sammy's story became increasingly viral throughout the country. A journalist from the TV came to the radio broadcast office to cover the story. Arriving at an altitude of 7162, Sammy rested in the base camp with a temperature of minus 40 degrees. While reading the novel, Sammy and Johnny chatted. Sammy was grateful that thanks to Johnny's help, he was able to get this far. Amid the conversation, because the weather was getting colder, Jeff asked everyone to immediately prepare to continue climbing. If they stayed, they would die in the extreme temperatures. It was better to move. After climbing for a long time, at the same time as the sun was rising, they arrived at a height of 7,924 meters. At the base camp, because oxygen was running low, Johnny gave Sammy his oxygen tank. Meanwhile, in France, the story of Sammy's climb had made it to the TV news. Seeing her son on TV, Sammy's mother was very proud. That day, Nadia and her mother came to meet Sammy's mother. Nadia apologized and expressed all of her feelings about Sammy. Even though she had doubts in the past, she had made up her mind. She promised that when Sammy returned, she would not waste his trouble. She would love him with all of her heart. Upon hearing Nadia's words, Sammy's mother hugged her. Sammy took the time to send a voice message to Nadia via satellite phone. In the message, he said that he wanted to take her on a date to the beach together. He hoped that his effort could make her accept his feelings. When they were preparing, Jeff reminded everyone that later they had to save oxygen as much as possible. If they ran out of oxygen, they wouldn't be able to last more than 5 minutes. At first, Sammy was still confident, but when he found out that Johnny had been replaced by another climber named George, he panicked. All this time, he felt safe because Johnny was beside him. After everyone was ready, Sammy, Jeff, and the others finally continued their journey. Meanwhile, because the current situation was getting hotter, the radio announcer held a live broadcast with the fans in front of Sammy's apartment, while inside, Nadia and Sammy's parents were watching together on the laptop. Due to oxygen running low, one by one the climbers gave up. Even climbers as good as Jeff also gave up. Even though his climb had to stop when he saw the beautiful view, Jeff was satisfied. After parting ways with the other climbers, only Sammy and George were left. Step by step, they both continued to walk. Amid the climb, Sammy was confused as to why he felt it was so difficult to breathe. When George checked, he was shocked because Sammy's oxygen tank was low. Because he didn't want to take the risk, George asked him to go down, but Sammy refused and insisted on reaching the peak. He didn't want to give up yet. He kept begging to let him continue climbing because this was the only chance he had. Seeing Sammy's determination, George finally allowed him. After a very long struggle, Sammy finally succeeded in reaching the summit, the peak of Mount Everest, the highest mountain peak in the world. 1 month passed and Sammy finally returned to France. When he met Nadia, without further ado, the boy immediately demanded her promise and Nadia, without the slightest hesitation, accepted him. The two of them then hugged. A few days later at the airport, when Johnny was looking for climbers who wanted to hire his services, suddenly a pilot gave him a package from Sammy containing a photo of his idol musician. He was so happy he wanted to cry. Even though it was just a photo, but for people him, it meant a lot.